Welcome to the Perimenopause and Midlife podcast. I'm your host, Terry Betsakis, and this is where we talk honestly about midlife, hormones, mindset, and becoming who you want to be next. Welcome to the Perimenopause and Midlife podcast. I'm your host, Terry Betsakis, and this week I'm talking with Karen Aroney. Karen is a nutritionist with a background in psychology and a women's health specialist, supporting women to improve their energy, confidence, and well-being through simple, science-based nutrition strategies. With qualifications in both psychology and nutrition, she blends evidence-based guidance with practical tools that fit real life, work, family, hormones, and everything in between. As the founder of Exec Fuel and Empower Her, Karen supports high performers, busy professionals, and women navigating hormonal changes to feel stronger, clearer, and more in control over their health. Welcome, Karen. Such a pleasure to have you.
Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Terry.
I'm excited to pick your brain. Can you share a little about yourself and what you do and how you support women in perimenopause?
Yes. So I, as you mentioned, I'm a nutritionist and psychologist, and my work predominantly in the perimenopause stage for women is around supporting them to understand not just the changes that are going on physiologically, but also the stages, the concerns that are going on psychologically for a lot of these women in this stage of life as well. And the way that I support this particular demographic is by showing women how to fuel effectively so that they get the best out of this stage of life, as opposed to feeling scared by it, unsure, confused, having too much information thrown at them and not knowing what to do with them. So it really is around making some informed decisions, understanding how to fuel strategically so that you can really work with this stage of life as opposed to trying to run away from it or feeling like you're broken or there's something wrong, which there absolutely isn't.
It's so true, isn't it? So much confusion and identity crisis that goes on, isn't there?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
You've actually mentioned to me about how perimenopause changes women's relationship with their own energy, their appetite, and their identity, and why so many high-achieving women feel like they're just losing their edge. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So a lot of high-achieving women always doing everything right, or at least trying to do everything right. And then when we get to that stage of perimenopause, the body stops responding the way it did when you were in your 20s and 30s, right? And you're starting to feel a lot.
Sure does.
And you're starting to feel a lot of push and pull and frustration around all these types of changes. A little bit of background, I suppose, for me was I actually worked in corporate for many, many years. So I've been doing this now for over 10 to 15 years now. And even when I was in corporate and trying to navigate that world, the way that I treated myself as a high achiever compared to how I would treat myself now is markedly different. You know, I really pushed hard. I underfueled or I overfueled or I skipped meals or I could just train the next day and it was easy. And, you know, we'd get our fitness or our body back or whatever it was that we were trying to achieve. And then I noticed as I was getting older, and particularly in this line of work now for the last 15 years, I've noticed that even I've had physiological changes and I relate it to myself to help women listeners and viewers understand that even when you do this full time, those changes can come as a bit of a shock. Like, oh, my body's changed and no one's told me. Right? Something's just happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
And no one knows why. And so a lot of the work that I do then to help with women at this stage is around understanding, firstly, energy. So we mentioned, you know, there's changes in the way we have energy or lack thereof. And so we really then need to work with a lot of sort of the estrogen, progesterone fluctuations that happen in the bodies. There's inconsistent energy due to hormonal imbalances. And so we really try and work around and for those imbalances. So whether that is some sort of therapy regarding hormones, but alongside that, having that nutrition therapy that can support that as well for those hormone imbalances. Because one day you'll be feeling sharp, the other day you're hitting a wall at 2 p.m. And you just want to have a nap, right? So
absolutely.
And the thing around...
That happens to the best of us, I think.
I think so, whether you're going through this or not. I think for high achievers or women that want to perform and like to perform or are hard on themselves, it's even harder because a lot of them interpret inconsistency as failure as well. So that really drains you of energy. And what I find in perimenopause with women is that we still continue to underfuel. So, or we're listening to so much of this external advice that actually isn't meant for our stage of life, that we're getting faster crashes. We're not losing any body fat or shifting any body fat if that's what we're trying to achieve. We're not getting any fitter or stronger. And it's basically feeling like we're at a loss all the time. So it's not as though we lose discipline. It's just that our physiology has changed. So that's the energy aspect of the work that we do. In terms of appetite, so the hunger cues in perimenopause become far more irregular as opposed to their 30s and 20s. So I'm not sure if that's happened to you. It's definitely happening with me. And, one day you could be absolutely ravenous, which could be, part of your cycle, or it could be part of your hormone changes. It could be anything, right? And then the next day you have no appetite for the whole day. So I get a lot of women coming to see me who feel like they can't keep this. Is there something wrong with me? Has my metabolism slowed? It hasn't. We've just got to make certain adjustments and be really strategic with how we fuel. So instead of restricting yourself, actually, we need to fuel even better than we have in the past. So that our metabolism is running strongly and consistently. So nutrition is appetite is a huge aspect of this.
Do you find that's a challenge for women, actually having to fuel as compared to cut? Because there's a huge push towards move more, eat less. And we've kind of grown up in the last few decades where we've been kind of almost brainwashed, I guess you could say, into going, we have to starve ourselves, eat less, etc. And all of a sudden you're telling your clients, no, you need to fuel more, make sure it's nourishing, etc. And they're being challenged by that. Do you find that?
Absolutely. Physiologically and psychologically, they are challenged by it. So if you're somebody that's been in diet culture and in dieting cycles for most of your life, it's going to be very difficult for you to get your head around, somebody's just told me that I need to eat more. It's not going to happen. So in those cases, we really work on a one-to-one basis with coaching around what does fueling look like and how does it look when you are training at a certain time or working a certain role, or you're also running a family, and you need it for recovery. So we really try and move away from that restrict piece to more of that, hey, how do I get more fuel? How do I ensure that this tank is running in this premium vehicle that I'm housed in? So it really is around understanding if we can flip the script from diet culture and that restrict mentality, then we can move more along the lines of how do I fuel and become more powerful and empowered? Because with restriction comes that whole mindset around being out of control, feeling like, there's a delusion around control, but really there isn't. Whereas when we're fueling, we have control. We can manipulate our metabolism. We can manipulate the way we perform. We can manipulate our energy as well. Yeah.
Definitely something I face with clients as well.
Yeah.
That shift from less to more.
Yes.
When someone's so resistant with you, with changing and increasing their food, how do you encourage them and guide them into increasing that nourishment?
Yes. This is where the identity coaching comes in a little bit. I think what we're trying to move away from is self-sabotage behavior and away from not having strong enough boundaries as well. And a lot of that resistance towards wanting to nourish more, which doesn't happen for too long. That resistance isn't there for too long once clients start to see results, women start to feel more energy and they start to feel happier and their body composition is changing. But initially, it really is around what identity do you want to embody in the long term? Is it somebody who will restrict, use willpower and then self-sabotage? Or is it somebody who, in the long term, their future self is somebody who's quite empowered, has the body composition changes they want, has the energy that they want at this stage, can then move from perimenopause to menopause with ease and understanding and clarity. And when we really talk around the science, especially in private coaching or even in the group program, the Empower Her program, when we talk around the coaching aspects of understanding that type of mentality is really around an identity built on self-sabotage and lack of discipline to a degree, and that consistency and that pushing through, inevitably you won't succeed. But when we then talk around fueling for power, for lack of self-sabotage, more around identity building for strength, having a community around you that understands and is going through something similar. I think that's a huge thing as well, because sometimes you can feel so alone around it.
Absolutely.
Then we make that identity shift from, okay, I'm not scared of food and calories and all that jargon around what that could mean for me and weight gain. And instead, I know what I'm eating. I know how to strategically fuel in between training sessions, in between meetings, at the end of the evening. So I'm feeling far more confident to try it. And then there's that whole piece around at the end of the day, well, okay, that's fantastic that we've started that process, but can you also see how that's going to help you recover and make you feel a lot better the next day as well?
Have you found that some of the symptoms that under eating or under fueling can contribute towards things like increased stress and sleep and those impacts? And how do you handle those if that's something you've dealt with?
Absolutely. When we restrict for too long and we get caught in that cycle of under eating or under fueling, what I start to see a lot of is muscle breakdown in perimenopause, which is inevitably something that happens anyway. Of course, we call that sarcopenia, which is something, Terry, you probably know very well as well, being in your field. So you're already dealing with that lack of muscle, or the muscle, slowly catabolizing or breaking down as we age. So when I see women coming into this stage of life and they're still restricting, I see them losing muscle, then losing energy, and then losing appetite. And so what we then sort of try and work with is getting that understanding around, okay, if we're going to be coming in and there is that restriction story that's coming in for you, the way that we handle it is one of the first and foremost things that I incorporate in their specific personalized meal plans is protein. So protein intake. And I know that there's everybody talking about it and women are like, I can't get any more protein. And it's one of those things where it's like, I don't want to eat any more protein, but we're still not getting enough protein, right? Because we're not being strategic with our fuelings. I feel like everybody's banging on about protein. Protein will support your muscle mass. Protein will then, if you're increasing muscle mass, it will increase your energy. If it increases your energy, you'll have clarity. You'll be happier. There's more, your hormones will start to stabilize again. And so I don't go at it with this approach of, oh, well, you've just got to eat. You've just got to eat more and you've got to eat at these specific times and this is how much you need. It's not that easy. I think we just start slowly, firstly, with protein being your non-negotiable. And then we work on some other steps after that. Once proteins become your non-negotiable, then we look at strategic carbing. How do we look at low GI carbs and we pair them with some protein so that you still have that fuel and that energy, because carbs are not the devil. It's fantastic, right? So, and then we then talk around regular fueling. How do we then time it so that everything is actually regular and consistent? And then we talk about inflammation and how we manage inflammation then with this particular fueling technique so that you're sleeping properly, your stress is reduced, your cortisol levels have reduced, and your recovery is a lot better so that when you do go into then exercise or movement, you're feeling stronger and you're getting the results that you want from that type of movement.
Absolutely. I'm listening to you and I'm like, great. I'm so great that we're on the same page here. I feel like I'm listening to myself when I talk to my clients about nutrition as well. So it's comforting to have some consistency, I guess, for the listeners so that at least they're like, oh, okay, this is actually what I'm supposed to be doing, instead of having more conflicting advice, because social media is full of it, as you know. We talk about protein because I agree. I always say protein is queen when it comes to your plate.
Yes.
And so what sort of protein do you recommend for our ladies?
It really depends on, it's a tough question because it really depends on your own preferences, your style of eating. So whether you are, say vegetarian or pescatarian, or you're a meat eater, and the type. It also depends on what type of movement or how much you move during the day. So it's actually threefold. It's probably tenfold in many ways, but it's threefold, right? Essentially. And I think the first and foremost is, what is your preference for protein? Pick that first. And then we can decide which protein is the best for you in terms of your preferences. So for me personally, I'm actually vegetarian. I love to lift. So I do a lot of lifting and I love to do weights. It doesn't affect that for me because I fuel consistently and I eat as much of the protein that I'm supposed to be eating for my movement, my body weight and my height and all those sorts of things. For those that are, not particularly devoted to any type of way of eating, it can be quite simple. My absolute first preference is for women to start really focusing on plant-based proteins first, because we just don't get enough of these in general as it is. So I'm talking things like legumes, lentils, beans, tofu. Most people don't like it, but that's fine. And then your plants like spinach, your broccoli, just really focusing on making sure that we're getting a lot more plant-based food into our diet, because there's so much more advantage to having plant-based protein rather than just the protein. There's all the micronutrients, there's the B vitamins that are associated with that. There's so much that goes on with being able to eat vegetables anyway. So that would be my probably first point of call. But again, it really depends on the preference of the person and what type of protein they like to eat.
Yes, absolutely. It's actually great to hear you talk about vegetarian or vegan or pescatarian or anything like that, where it's more plant-based. I'm an omnivore myself, so it's nice to have the other side of the information for the listeners as well, because I do that. I have to adjust. Just because I'm an omnivore, that doesn't mean my listeners are omnivores.
Exactly.
So I have to adjust what advice I give in line with the individual as well.
Yeah.
So it's nice to hear it from the other side, also taking people's preferences into account. And so that the listeners are getting two different viewpoints, that it's our preference, but it doesn't mean that you and I are conflicting.
Exactly.
And that's where I think is very important for listeners to know that it doesn't matter what your style of eating is. There is a way that you can fuel your body and nourish it so that you're getting those results. Because I just kind of feel like there's so much conflict out there. I personally like to be able to embrace ladies and just take them where they're at and, work with them with whatever they desire. So it's so lovely to speak with somebody who has the same viewpoint.
Oh, fantastic.
And I feel that if we all join together, that it's going to be even better for our listeners.
I totally agree. I think that, to your point, most women, particularly at the age and stage of perimenopause, are quite hard on themselves as it is. And having so much information out there, I know that my clients are, there's so many shoulds, that women are doing things that aren't aligned with themselves personally anyway. And one of those things is how we eat. The other thing is how we train, and that, so it's really important to sort of it comes down to, okay, what do you enjoy? Because that's what will be sustainable for you in the long term.
What are some of the things that you give as, say, a week 1, week 2 changes to a person's nutrition? What are some of the things that you guide them into that are baby steps, I guess, that you could say, eat the elephant one bite at a time, so that they can get started?
One of the things that we really focus on first is absolutely the requirement to either journal or track your food first. I'm not going to lie. I think 50% of my client base hates doing it. The other 50% love it. So it's one of those things. It's always going to be that way. Yeah. But the reason I say it and I recommend it is because you first need to have an idea of what goes into your body. And if you're not putting it down and it's not in front of you, you won't have a clear understanding as to what you're taking in the day. So that absolutely needs to be your number one, whether you journal it gently, right? Doesn't need to be hardcore for anyone. And or if you're using a tracker like MyFitnessPal, then you just put it into MyFitnessPal. So giving yourself a good 7 days to see is the first point of call for anyone who's wanting to change the way they eat, because then you can see where you may be in deficit with your protein, for example, or where typically you're over-indexing on your carbohydrate intake, for example.
Yeah, so powerful.
Yep. So we want to be able to see the data first. And then what we typically do in the first week is I would like to make small adjustments to an existing way of eating. It's not an overhaul because, again, it's not sustainable. So one of the best ways to sort of work on changing your meal plan or your week of food in that first week, if you're somebody that trains or exercises or moves, first point of call is put in there what days you exercise and you train, right? Let's get some idea as to what type of movement you're doing first before we completely rejig workout or your meal plan, for example. One of the reasons that I do that is because I then want to see what sort of timing, what the timing might look like for somebody who is training, because at this age, your most important meal of the day is actually going to be a post-training meal. And the reason I say that is because, and Terry's smiling because she knows why, we all know why, is because it's the time that your body's absolutely primed post-training to take that fuel, those nutrients, and actually do something with them. It's also a great time to be taking in your carbohydrates to refuel your energy, great time to protein for your energy and muscles to uptake that protein. So it's a really good time post-training to be fueling as your most important meal of the day. So that's one of the things that I ask first is show me exactly when you're training and we can work your day around that and your day of food around that. Because the last thing you want is for somebody to actually be skipping, their post-training meal, say it's breakfast or maybe lunch, and then having a massive meal in the evening. It's not going to work for you. So we really try and balance out that day. And then I start to bring in, where can we then start to slot in some protein? Let's look at where you're not getting enough protein first, and we start to incorporate protein throughout that meal plan. So that would take about 1 to 2 weeks to begin with before there's a bit of a rhythm, and then we make some other small shifts after that.
You've definitely hit the nail on the head with that one. I was smiling. As a former athlete, I can tell you the post-workout, the post-training meal has always been my favorite, and still is. So yes, definitely the importance of post-workout. What happens to the ladies in your viewpoint? I know what my opinions are, but in your viewpoint, what about the whole fasting cardio and no breakfast and train and all that information that's out there?
Yeah.
If this podcast is resonating, I'm Coach Terry Batsakis, a nutrition, mindset and health coach for women navigating perimenopause and midlife. I support women in managing hormonal symptoms, feel more at home in their bodies, and move through this phase with confidence and clarity. If you need support navigating midlife, you can find out more about working with me at terrybatsakis.com.au.
So I get asked this question a lot, particularly when I'm speaking or in seminars, because when you're presenting and talking on this topic, there will always be somebody who's had, years of faster training, particularly in their 20s and 30s, and then carries that into their midlife. I am not a big fan of it at all. And I think there's 2 reasons why I say this. The first one is that when we are in perimenopause, our bodies don't respond well to not fueling. We're already breaking muscle mass down quite quickly at this age, which means that, it's a bit of an imbalance. If we're breaking muscle mass down, it means that something else is going to be going up. And I think a lot of us know what that is. It's usually fat mass. So the more muscle we have, the easier it is to keep that body fat low as well at this age, at the stage of your life. So if you're not fueling, your body will respond and start breaking down some muscle protein as fuel. It'll already try and use up its glycogen stores, which is its energy fuel. And then it depends on whether that person is training fasted or is just fasting for the sake of fasting and not training fasted. So I'll break this down into sort of 2 sections. If you're training fasted at this age, I do not recommend it at all. In fact, I think the latest research is showing that we need to be having at least 20 to 25 grams of protein before our training sessions anyway now. And we don't need to be training as intensely as we were either. So, some nice lifting. And that will support our central nervous system. So not only will it support our central nervous system and keep our stress levels down, but it will keep us satiated and we won't be absolutely howling for food during a training session. And there's a marked difference between training really hungry and training not hungry. And the output is so much better. So essentially, when you're going into a training session or an exercise session, what you want to be doing is progressing. It's progressing on that session. You don't want to be going in there and giving it 20, 30, 40% and not getting any results from your training, but you will end up not getting the results of your training if you're not fueling effectively for that session. So I don't recommend it. Also, it's not great for the body after post-training for it to be left unfed for that long at this age as well. Our body will really draw on that muscle mass for fuel. Again, it'll just cause an imbalance in our hormones and our body fat. If you're not training, but you're choosing to fast. I'm not as vocal on this because I think to myself,
that.
well,
As vocal.
not as vocal. I still am, but I'm not as vocal because if you're not somebody who exercises or wants to move, your general daily energy expenditure is low anyway. With that, we want to be probably keeping our energy input, which is the calories we take in, a little bit low as well, particularly at this age. And then the only thing I do really recommend for those who aren't exercising or moving is that we focus very mindfully on eating the better proteins and maybe minimizing overeating on carbohydrates, because that carbohydrate is the fuel that gives us the energy to move. And if you're somebody who's not exercising, then I recommend that we sort of change the scales a little bit between protein and carbohydrate.
Yeah, perfect. I love it. See, that's just another area that we agree on. See, this is why the universe brought us together.
Exactly. This is too easy.
So easy. Can you talk to me about, or talk to us, all of our listeners, a little about the differences between synthetic protein, so taking shakes and protein bars and supplements like that, versus whole foods?
There's a few things we need to be quite wary of. I mean, I always do promote whole foods over synthetic because, again, people are not getting the right amount of whole food protein in their diet anyway. Generally, unless you're somebody who has been coached by a nutritionist or a dietitian, or you're in sport, you may not have enough of an understanding as to why getting whole foods in is important in the first place. Synthetic protein is exactly what you said, synthetic. So there are a few things we need to be careful of. I don't recommend synthetic protein to anybody who has kidney issues because for a very obvious or not obvious reason, it's actually quite toxic for somebody who has any sort of kidney disease and isn't able to process high protein products anyway. The other concern I have with synthetic protein, and whilst I still recommend it and I use synthetic protein myself, one of the bigger concerns that I do have is when people start to overdo synthetic protein and it's very high in sodium. And so having something on a daily basis that is high in sodium is one way of leading to high blood pressure eventually, especially if there are other products in the day that you eat, such as salt or packet foods that already have high sodium in them as well. I'm not adverse to synthetic protein. I know some other specialists are, depending on who they are, but I do first and foremost recommend let's get your whole food protein down pat from the beginning so that you know,
absolutely.
And then we supplement with a synthetic protein where it's needed.
See? This is why the universe has brought us
It's too
together
easy.
once again. I agree. I kind of feel like that's why it's called a supplement, because it goes in conjunction with whole
100%.
food. So there's a place for it, because there are times when you may not be getting enough, or life just gets hectic and you kind of go, okay, I've got a quick shake or something like that. Post-workout, add some extra. As you said, pre and post-workout, you definitely need some extra protein in so that A, you can get your performance, and B, you can get your recovery. And so, yes, it's a great supplement, but it's definitely not something that should be taken in isolation without whole foods.
Exactly.
I agree there. And when I say definitely shouldn't be taken, and this is one of those shoulds that I'm not a should person, but this is one of those I feel very strongly on, that is a should. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
It's a difficult. Well, not so much difficult, it can be complex, because there are clients that I work with who are in roles that require them to travel 80 to 90% of the year. And I think it's also situational. So if you're somebody who isn't in a position where you are required to travel extensively, or you are working strange shifts, I do work with shift workers as well, then absolutely, I think you really need to get your whole food proteins understood and have a very consistent intake throughout the day of those whole food proteins, with the supplements being supplements. On occasion, there are instances where a supplement may have to suffice if you're somebody who is flying and traveling and in between airports. And a lot of my clients are that way inclined, where they're quite busy. So I think it's a case by case basis. But if we're talking more generally, absolutely understanding what you need to have from a whole food perspective is more important in terms of protein.
Yeah, I agree. See, that's exactly when I say that it's a should, that's exactly how I take it as well. That it should be taken into consideration as whole foods first.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely, you've got to take into account a person's lifestyle, because there are going to be times when the only thing you can have is a shake,
Yeah.
or is some other type of supplementation in replacement of it. 100%, I totally agree with you. And you know, we do have to take that into account. And I don't like people beating themselves up because, oh, I don't take supplements, or I
Yeah.
use that instead of a meal, or but I am a big fan of whole foods wherever we possibly can. But again, being dynamic humans, we do have to be very flexible with that. I agree. And as you said earlier, also with the person's, their mindset and their mental state as well, there's so many shoulds and coulds. And I am a bit mean when I say focus on whole foods, but I try and do that, you know, as much as possible. But I totally agree. As somebody who, you know, is a recipient of lots of rules, I'm a woman too, in the middle years, you get so many rules and regulations.
Yeah.
You're like, oh my God, all these shoulds. So yeah, we do need to be mindful of that. Agree.
Yeah. Yep.
Complex carbohydrates. Now, there's a huge conversation with regards to how many should we have, what's good, what's not. Can you talk us through about complex carbs for performance, for day-to-day life, etc.?
Yeah. Complex carbohydrates are basically the carbohydrates that are lower in GI. So the way that that's measured is that they will give you more energy for longer rather than having your short burst, simple carbohydrates, simple energy that we intake. So I think the better comparisons is, say, something like a piece of wholemeal bread might keep you a little bit fuller for longer than a lolly snake, for example, right? So those probably the most basic.
They're always yummier, though.
I know. And it's great for a short burst of energy, but then there's a bit of a crash after that. But you're right, it is. Depending on what you put on the toast, I suppose. But yeah. And then,
true.
So complex carbohydrates will keep you fuller for longer. And yes, they are better for you in the way that, again, they can sustain energy. They're a slower release of energy for a person. But also, some complex carbohydrates, there's carbohydrates in everything except protein. So carbohydrates refer to fruit, they refer to vegetables, and they refer to grains as well. So I do get a lot of jaw dropping sometimes when I'm running a seminar, for example, and I say, you know, there is carbohydrate in this vegetable, and it could be a spinach leaf, but yes, it is, right?
Lettuce contains carbs. What?
I
know, right?
So it's like, I'm eating too many. But it's more around understanding that they're a healthy carb, they're a great carb, they're an intentional carb. And so to your question, understanding complex carbohydrates, first of all, we need to know what they are. So getting yourself really familiarized with what they look like, what categories they fit in, what foods have complex carbohydrates. I think this is the education piece that most women need to still work on for themselves. I think the lack of education is where the confusion comes. So knowing what complex carbohydrates are, then knowing for your stage of life when and how to be consuming those carbohydrates. So particularly for women in midlife and in perimenopause and menopause, we try not to overdo that complex carbohydrate intake in the evening, because our bodies really need that fueling for the day. And if we're going to be fueling in the evening, there really isn't much room for error there in terms of we won't be moving our bodies, we'll be going straight to bed, we'll be relaxing. So we don't really need that much fueling in the evening at this stage of life, because again, the focus is on protein in the evening for various reasons. Again, muscle recovery, cortisol to come down, our brains to function well. And so ideally what we want to be doing is, when we're looking at complex carbohydrates, is knowing what they're there for and what they look like, and then timing them for certain times of the day so that you have that extensive fueling throughout the day. And this is what we mean by fueling for energy. It's having those carbs at the strategic times and then just tapering in the evening so that we're not overdoing it in the evening when we're not actually using our minds and our bodies as much.
It's interesting. I think this is our first conflict.
Love it.
I wouldn't exactly call it a conflict. I use carbohydrates in the evening quite a lot for women who struggle with sleep because I find that it helps them sleep, especially something like bananas that have got magnesium in them. As long as it is coupled with protein. I'm a huge fan of protein in the evening as well. And so I recommend the carbohydrates in the evening if you're struggling with sleep. I agree with you from an energy perspective. So it is a very individual thing.
Yeah.
We have to kind of, I feel I just adjust according to the individual person. Do you find that there are some people that you work with that do better with carbohydrates at night, or generally no?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. It's a case by case. It's a case by case scenario. Again, it's there are some people who, on a more general term, with women in perimenopause, carbohydrate is a requirement to taper in the evening because I think the general population probably gets more in the evening than they need to, just generally, right?
For sure.
We do it too. I do it. There are nights,
Yeah.
you just do it. But
Yeah,
you've just got to
absolutely.
be mindful of that and not beat yourself up and go, okay, I know that this is why I'm doing it and I know that it's not going to serve me. There are clients that do tend to have carbohydrate in the evening, but it really then depends on, again, this is the next layer, which is what is your goal? If your goal is to get some energy back, get your sleep back, lower your stress levels, start to eat more consistently, not skip evening meals, then we can absolutely introduce carbohydrate in there and make it really basic and carbohydrate that can be used with a purpose as opposed to just sort of that snacking or simple carbohydrate.
Yeah.
Women like that can afford to and probably need to have carbohydrate in the evening. But the flip side of that too is that if your goal is for body composition change for a lot of women and you're not a power lifter, so there's a different complexity to that, then you probably try and taper more towards the evening and then fuel most of your carbohydrates. And we really just focus on magnesium supplements in the evening as opposed to food.
I love that you mentioned about goals because I think that's super important for the ladies to understand that anything that you implement, because as we said earlier, like we read so much on social media and the internet and now on AI, etc., that there's so much conflicting information. It's like, oh, try a bit of this, I'll try a bit of that, try the other. But what is it that you're trying to achieve and what is right for you?
You're so right. This is when we shift, sort of circle back to identity embodiment. I mean, it's what was your goal, your primary goal? What type of identity do you want to have in 6 months' time or 12 months' time? And then we work towards that goal more than just around, okay, well, these are the norms. Let's work within these norms. Because I don't actually even, when I work personally or even in the group program with women around, say, your earlier question around complex carbohydrates, we don't even work on what are just the standard percentages that are brought out by, our national health information. We really need to then also tailor them towards what's your goal and what are you training for? How do you train? How active are you during the day? Do you sit down all day at a desk? Those sorts of things. So you're spot on.
Absolutely. What about fats? Let's go to fats. We may as well cover all macros, seeing as we've spoken about protein and carbs, carbs/fiber. So let's turn to fats. Talk me through what your thought process on fats are. Goods, bads, etc.
I was going to ask you, yes, can you clarify goods, bads, etc. Fats. We actually do overtake or take in too much fat in our diet on a general level. And again, it's a result of just misinformation and confusion for a lot of women. But one of the ways that I try and mitigate too much fat intake is not necessarily by throwing around the whole low fat, low fat, low fat. We can do that, but it's a headache, and not everything low fat is created equal anyway. So what we try and then really focus on is building a plate that is really focused on half of that plate being vegetables, a quarter of that plate being protein, a quarter of that plate being starchy carbohydrate, if you choose to have it. And then as a bit of a topping, or a little bit of that can actually be fats that we add on to that. Because what I see, it's quite inverted. So, I mean, the best example I always give, because it makes me laugh so much, is those avocado on toast breakfasts, for example. just blows my mind because
with the seeds and the nuts.
yes, and I'm sitting there and I walk past
and
it.
an egg on top.
Yeah. Be lucky to throw
They're
an egg on
delicious,
top.
by the way. I'm not knocking them. They're so yum.
They are, absolutely. Actually, and I would wish I could see more of an egg on top, but I don't. So what I normally see is just avocado on toast and sometimes with some olive oil. And avocado is incredibly high in fat. Why don't we focus on building more of a plate around the protein and the carbohydrate first? And then we add a little bit of avocado to that as a little bit of a topping. That's just a real world example. So
Yeah.
I do find that whether it's those bad fats or good fats, it really doesn't matter sometimes. I think a lot of us are at that age now where we kind of know the difference. We know when we're having the good fats, we know we're having the bad fats. I'm not even going to bore the listeners by telling them what that sounds like, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
what we
good.
tend to do, what we tend to do more of is eat too much good fat. So, we might be overindulging in the nuts, but then we'll have an avocado breakfast and then we'll just be like lashings of olive oil. Those foods are fantastic for your health. They are fantastic for your health. But if you look at the overall day or week, it's probably blowing out what your natural body's intake needs to be. So we need to be conscious
And
of
too
that.
much of anything is not great, right?
That's it. Too much of anything. And absolutely right. So it's not about taking those fats away because they make you fat. It's about really being conscious that even though it's healthy, too much of it is still too much energy. The energy intake of fat is quite high. It's higher than carbohydrates, higher than protein. Where if you're going to be taking in that much energy from fats, and this is the sports nutritionist in me now, is going to be really conflicting with that energy intake from carbohydrates. And so your body is going to prefer to use that quick energy from carbohydrates, and we're just going to store that other fuel from fats as well.
Yeah.
So we're just going to be more conscious around how much we're actually taking in the day. It's not about not having them.
And from an energy sports perspective, you become a little more sluggish if you have overdosing on the fats as well.
Yeah.
And so it just does reduce your performance. I do feel, however, that there's also, you've got to take into consideration a person's somatic type as well, because some people do cope better with fats than they do with carbohydrates.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I'm on board 100%. I think it's, for me, I not only believe in the somatic types, I also work with, this is controversial in itself, but, your blood type too. I think that it really impacts so much of what you're going to eat and how your body is going to either be inflamed or not inflamed, whether it's good for you or not.
Yeah.
Just depending on who you are.
It's such an individual thing.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
It really is individual. I think you're so right. Like it's, if somebody's respond incredibly well to being on a keto diet, but those bodies need to maintain that and they need to sustain that, which is where the difficulty is. There's actually nothing really wrong with these diets per se. It's just that we abuse them and we say, for example, you might be on a high keto diet, but then you might be feeling, I'm so tired, I'm going to have a few wines on a Friday. And then we're initially going from a high fat diet to now we're bringing in carbohydrates as well. And that's going to cause a real imbalance in our hormones and our body composition. So there's no issue with having a higher fat diet if that's what your body prefers, particularly if you're somebody who has some disease or needs to do some work with their metabolism, for example. However, we just got to be conscious of what else we're introducing in the diet if we choose to have a high fat diet.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of feel like there's a lot of diets in quotation marks out there where you got to follow a specific plan. There's so many rigid rules and regulations, and I'm very anti putting a title on anything that I encourage a person to eat. When I'm teaching people about nutrition, I tend to go, I don't want to put a title on this. I'd rather just create this as your diet. This is your nutrition for your body, rather than let's call it vegetarian, pescatarian, omnivore. Like even to that degree, because sometimes people just want that flexibility. They want their body needs different things. And I kind of feel like when you put titles on things, you're really stuck with rules and regulations that can really inhibit you.
Yes. Very much so. My favorite diet is Mediterranean, but that in itself is a title as well. And actually it's quite a confused diet on many levels. But what the Mediterranean diet allows for is far more flexibility in what you can eat and the variety of food you can eat as whole food. as opposed to not being stuck in one sector, which could be your high protein or your high fat sector, for example.
Yeah, correct. I'm a fan of the Mediterranean. If I was going to pick anything, it would definitely be that.
It's so
I
good.
have to say, maybe it's our genetics.
It's really our genetics. It's our heritage. It is. And it's also just
We've
such
got to stick with it.
That's it. It's but it allows for such a wide range of vegetables in that diet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. And let's face it, whoever has too many vegetables, really? Like no one, right? So the more the merrier.
Yeah, exactly.
Karen, it has been an absolute pleasure. Before we wrap it up, is there anything that you want to, final words or final tips that you want to share with our listeners?
Oh, so many, but where do I start? Okay. So many, always so much to say.
Let's just go, I don't know, top 3 or something.
Well, one of the first things I want to say around perimenopause and your listeners is that you're not broken. Totally normal. Everything that women are experiencing at this stage of life is very normal, whether they feel it's abnormal or not. It's just that we haven't been educated on how to care for ourselves when we're in this stage of life, because all the information out there is created for men and women who are not in perimenopause. So it's really difficult to get your head around what you can be doing to feel better and to look better, because it really is around both, I think. And once you understand what's happening, then you can start to feel and look like yourself a little bit again, which is, I think, what women at this stage now in life want. It's actually, I just want to sort of come back to myself now and understand what my body needs, how to fuel effectively, how to eat properly, get out of diet culture. And I think one of the things that we need to start doing first is that level of acceptance. Like, okay, I'm here now. I do need to make some small changes to my life to adapt to and adjust to this stage of life for women in perimenopause. And I think for women that are feeling really alone, there are so many communities out there that can help with that as well and make you feel less alone in this stage of life.
That liberating stage of life that I call it. It's at that point, I kind of feel like this is our transition stage into freedom.
It really is.
Like to just reinvent ourselves.
Oh, so much. I mean, you've accomplished so much by this stage of your life. And women, unfortunately, at this stage of life feel like they've accomplished nothing because they're imbalanced hormonally. They're still sticking to diets that aren't working. They're trying to out-train the way they eat. And so instead of coming at it from an empowerment perspective, which is what I try and work on with women, they come at it from I'm just a failure. I'm a failure because nothing's worked. Yeah, you're not.
I feel like we've got the same clients. Oh, wait, we do.
I think we must. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Karen, it has been an absolute pleasure to meet you and chat with you. So many gold nuggets. I think the ladies out there are going to get so much out of this interview. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for joining me.
If the women are interested, they can more than welcome to visit my website and whatnot and have a look around nutrition. If it's okay with everybody out there, it's at Exec Fuel. You can find me on Instagram at Exec Fuel. But there's a lot of stuff that I put out around free resources, free webinars, and just really focused towards nutrition at this stage of life, especially for high-performing women.
You actually beat me to it because I was actually going to say, if the ladies want to reach out to you, how do they contact you?
Thanks, Terry. Yes, absolutely. I think it's the easiest way is to just play around the website, have a look at a couple of the programs that are available. I do one-to-one programs under Exec Fuel, and then the Empower Her program is the women's group program. That's a 6-month program.
Well, I'll put all of your contact details into the notes well, so people can reach out to you if they can't find you. They can look at the story notes and actually get that information directly from there.
Thanks, Terry.
All right, so that wraps up another week of the Perimenopause and Midlife podcast. Thank you very much for joining. Well, let's wrap it up for today, and we'll talk to you very soon. Thank you for listening to the Perimenopause and Midlife podcast. Join me next time for more honest conversations about midlife and what's possible from here.